One feature of 2023 as well as the end of 2022 is that there was a lack of cold air, but when it was cold, it came down in the form of a polar vortex. You might not be recognized today as a polar vortex, likely because of the fact that temperatures did not actually get as cold as they normally would during a polar vortex. But make no mistake, this was in some places record-breaking cold temperatures, and it was constrained by the fact that it was in the middle of May. Saranac Lake, which dipped down to 16 degrees in the morning, saw their lowest temperature so late in the season, while many other places across New England saw their latest ever freezes. In the New York metro area, freezes were even reported as close in as Poughkeepsie, which tied their record low of 30. Record lows were tied throughout the New York metro area as well, with Islip sinking to 38 and Kennedy Airport sinking to 42. Bridgeport broke their record by them sinking to 38 degrees. The Farmingdale weather station hit 41 degrees as their morning low, where I live in Plainview likely actually sank to about 39 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit instead. And it was a very cold morning all across the board. Temperatures that bottomed out in the mid and upper 30s were recorded in central New Jersey, even into southern New Jersey and southern Pennsylvania. We saw those temperatures. Philadelphia was, I think, down to 44 at their coldest. That's also how cold it got in the city center of New York, which prevented records in those places. But parts of the Poconos in Pennsylvania broke record lows by having temperatures sink down to about 26 degrees. It's a bit interesting as to how this managed to happen in the first place. And there were a few other polar vortex events that happened that were definitely more clear that there were polar vortexes than this event. And so I do kind of want to go through how that happened and what makes this. So first of all, this was a bit of a unique case of a polar vortex, and it's similar to what sometimes happens. The weather during this was actually similar to the one that we got in September. Only the one in September was, number one, a lot more abrupt. Number two, was not nearly as cold. And considering how historical record lows are similar for both late September and mid-May, there's not really that excuse anymore. And number three, the only reason why it was so sharp in that case was the fact that we were coming off of a really warm summer, whereas in this case, it is simply just the fact that there hasn't been a lot of cold temperatures, and even during that 12-day streak of below average temperatures, it was never that below average. I mean, the highs did sink down to 53 degrees on April 29th during a rainstorm, but lows were then kept in the upper 40s. So we haven't seen these temperatures largely since the end of April. In some places, even the middle of April, middle to end of April. So it is interesting to see this happen. First of all, it was quite warm on Tuesday with temperatures topping out across the upper 70s and touching on 80 degrees. So something first had to be done about that. And it was the same general warm pattern of where it got really warm, then the temperature moderated a little bit, and then it yet again got warm, very warm again, and then moderated with Islip breaking a record high of 81 degrees on Saturday, May 13th, where record warm lows would have been broken had a cold front not come in at about 8 o'clock to usher in nice weather for Mother's Day. But again, there seemingly was no pattern to end this. And then that pattern actually finally broke through on yesterday. This was when there was that start of this weather reality check for that we are in fact in May and not in June. In the morning, there was an incredibly stiff wind, and temperatures were actually at 56. And in some places, they were even at 58. But the stiff wind made it feel much colder than what it actually is. I don't know what the hell that was. So after that, the temperature could only actually make it to the mid-60s in the afternoon on Wednesday. So even though the official high was 69 in Central Park and 68 at Farmingdale, that was just because there was residential warmth from the day before, because it cooled off very slowly in the afternoon. That's a big reason why in the morning it was only in the mid-50s, which is actually what it was the previous morning. And it starts coming during the day. And then that stiff wind actually died down. So it actually felt a little warm in the afternoon for some weird reason. Then, after dark, the temperature just dropped. And that's how we wake up in temperatures are, in the 30s or low 40s in the morning. And it was brief as it quickly warmed up. But then something else happened. The high temperatures began to plateau. We think that the highs today were 61 at Central Park and Newark, which both saw lows of 44 in the morning, 57 at Islip, and 58 at Bridgeport. And we think that, the high here where I live, 59. So those highs around 60 are well below what they should be. So after a record cold morning, not that much warming up that occurs during the day. Poughkeepsie actually managed to hit 65 after their frosty start this morning, and we were able to see many other places rebound deep into the 60s as well. That was not the case here, as temperatures only managed to float with 60, and in some places even stayed in the 50s under an even stiffer wind that makes me question how the unofficial start of summer could possibly be within 2 weeks, and how we have GFS models that for some reason are forecasting it's going to be 90 degrees. I'm not buying that, to be honest. And what happens next from here is that we're going to see this slow warming pattern. It's going to plunge into the 40s in most suburbs of New York City, but the city itself is expected to keep itself above 50 throughout the entire night. This is expected to be the last sub 40 night in the city, sub 50 night in the city this year, which actually, given our climate changed world, this is about the normal time now that we see a last low in the 50s. It's normally about the third week in May. We're also expecting highs to top out in the mid-60s. So kind of a bit of a revert back to what happened on Wednesday. Rain is expected on Saturday, but only about a half inch. More of it's falling out east, which is actually where they could use the rain the most, because that's why they didn't get their rain from late April. We are dealing with some dry conditions, and we haven't seen rain in a week and a half. We're going to go about 14 days without rain, and there's not going to be that much on Saturday, but it's not that bad for areas west of the Cross Island Parkway, given how they got a deluge of over 5 inches on the weekend of April 29th to April 30th. They still have moisture left in from that. And plus, there was over 2 inches of rain that fell the weekend before in an overnight storm. So they're fine west of the Cross Island Parkway for now. But east of the Cross Island Parkway, there are going to be many issues with drought if we don't get rain, because we didn't get as much rain. We only got about 3 inches of rain during those storms, and an inch of rain in the storm for the weekend before that. So, again, fine west of the Cross Island and bad east of the Cross Island Parkway locally. And this rain is again shifting to the east, so we'll see how all this manages to unfold. Now, I told you how this is the third polar vortex event of the year. The first 2 polar vortex events, you would definitely agree with me that they were, in fact, polar vortex events. This was a polar vortex event in where the polar vortex was kind of situating itself on northern New York. But the issue is, again, is that once it's in May, it's hard to understand this. Like, you can have a polar vortex in July, and yet, at best, you're going to get Long Island in the upper 40s. And the city itself, I don't think it's capable of dropping below 50 during July or August. Not that they really can happen during the summer. This is about as late in the year where you even can get this kind of polar vortex. But the polar vortexes that we had earlier this year, one was from late December around Christmas time, the other was from the first weekend in February. The Christmas time one was actually part of a much larger storm system that was known for bringing cold temperatures everywhere, including the coldest ever temperature in Casper, Wyoming at negative 42 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature dropped rapidly with the storm, and yes, New York City did see their largest daily temperature drop on record, from 58 down to 8 in a single day. New York City actually was not able to set a record for coldest max temperature on December 24th at 15. Everywhere else was warmer at 16 or 17, yet they could. I found that to be weird. I think where I was also 16, but and obviously the exact numbers vary depending on where you were, but again, there was a case for where the city, again, the longer periods of records kind of screwed us over. The low, again, 7 degrees, pretty consistent across the metro area for it to have been about 7 degrees. And again, I'll do some more research into all of this polar vortex events. But it was very cold, and I remember how cold December was, and this almost began to foreshadow a very brutal winter, which we did not have. And a 3-day cold wave ensued because Sunday, Monday also failed to get above freezing. Whereas in Florida, everyone was complaining because for how 3 consecutive days it failed to get above 60. And I'm just like, bruh. But that's how it works in South Florida. Half the city shuts down in Miami when the temperature is in the 50s for the afternoon high. They really can't deal with it very well. Now, in the February polar vortex event, it was different. So the cold was brought on much quicker, and it was a much more type of fleeting event. It only affected the Northeast, and actually New York City was around the southern fringes of where it was anything historical type cold. Not a national event, did not last for as long, but again, more media attention on the Northeast because it's all we had. And this was a $1 billion weather disaster, even though the cold came in so quickly. However, it also wasn't as quick in the perspective of, remember, it was a cold pattern in December, but a storm was able to push temperatures into the upper 50s. And then it had to fall all the way back down within 20 hours. In this event, the record warmth from January had already begun to abate. And after the record warmth had already begun to abate, we were in this pattern where it was like right around normal. I remember February 2nd had a low of 24 and high of 39 here in my suburb, where the city had a low of 29 and a high of 40. Anyway, temperatures were consistently around 35 and dropped to about 11 during the polar vortex, but it felt much colder during the day, mainly because of the fact that it was already in this cold pattern. So temperatures were in the 20s, which then fell into the teens, and it did hit 3 degrees. My suburb, I think, bombed out at 4, but the city at Central Park, they hit 3 degrees. No records there, but Bridgeport -4, Newark at 5, LaGuardia at 5, Kennedy at 6. Those were records. Those were records. And we just saw this really crazy quick polar vortex event, and then temps actually managed to recover back to the upper 20s by midnight, and guess what? By Sunday morning, temperatures are already above freezing, and by the end of the day, it's already back in the mid to upper 40s. It was really quick. I do also now want to take the time to discuss to you as to how we haven't really seen something like this for a while. First of all, people might be wondering about the May 2021 event on Memorial Day weekend. That set record lows for highs, but only LaGuardia set a record low on the actual low temperature at 48. And during this event, they got to 46, but that wasn't a record. The highs, which were in the low 50s, were obviously records. That wasn't quite a polar vortex, though. That was an offshore nor'easter that brought cold air down. So already baseline much colder than average, considering that cold front had moved through before a storm happened. And then rain and clouds kept the temperatures from rising pretty much more than 4 degrees from their already near record lows. That's what made the Memorial Day event to be so unusual. It was that. We had a similar kind of snap back in April 2022. That was more so a really big cold event for Baltimore, which got sub-freezing. Oh, not sub-freezing, but it hit 32. But once you got to the city, it was only down to 40. So, again, not as cold there as in other places. We saw an event like this in May 2020, that I will admit. We saw near monthly record lows come down on Mother's Day Eve. So definitely a lot earlier in the year than this. But I still think this is a pretty rare event. So we're not going to say like that day with the really cold high temperatures that are struggling at around 50, but looks like we got a polar vortex in. That was pretty interesting.